Well, good morning to you. Here we are. Can you believe it? On the last day of Genesis. When we finish today, you will have completed two whole books of the Bible. There you go. You'll have some great foundation in. So this is the Bible in the year 2021. We're on day 29 and we're on the last day of Genesis, having already completed Job. So I'm not going to keep you long, or I hope not to. So we're going to get right into this, get moving along quickly because we've got a bit of stuff to cover here. So Genesis 48:5. We're gonna start it off with Joseph losing his two sons. Yes, they get adopted by his dad. His dad takes them over. Look at this in verse 5. Now, your two sons born to you in the land of Egypt before I arrived in Egypt are my own. Ephraim and Manasseh are just like Reuben and Simeon to me. Wow. There's no tribe of Joseph. Joseph was replaced by um, the two half tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. So, and then his dad goes on and he says that any other children that you have are going to come under these two, are going to come under, they'll either come under Manasseh or Ephraim, but this is how it is going forward. So, so we talk about the 12 tribes, but there really is no tribe of Joseph because Joseph is made up of two, you could call them half tribes, but they are tribes themselves of Ephraim and Manasseh. So there's actually 13 tribes of Israel. So yeah, how's that? So, and then in verse 7, we just see the effects of Jacob's age here. I just wanted to point this out because out of the blue, he's talking about Ephraim and Manasseh and Joseph. And then out of the blue, he starts talking about Rachel. When I came back from Paddan Aram, Rachel died to my sorrow. On the road in the land of Canaan, with some distance yet to go to Ephrathah, so I buried her there, near the road to Ephrathah, which is Bethlehem. There's, I mean, that's just from nowhere. That's just no context. Bang. Poor guy is getting old and is beginning to ramble. And then and then Ephraim and Manasseh are presented to. He asks to see them. He asks to see. Well, no, he doesn't ask. Sorry, Joseph brings them because he knows his dad is about to die. So he brings them for his father's blessing. This is the respect that Joseph is showing his father Jacob. And man, Sunday school does terrible things. Sunday school tries to get kids to identify. They have David, King David, being a kid facing the giant, and I mean, in those times, I guess he would be considered young, but I mean, he wasn't 9 years old, that's for sure. And I remember in Sunday school this being presented with Jacob blessing these kids, but they weren't kids. They were anywhere between 18 to 20 years old. You got to remember that they were born before the famine, and and Jacob came into Egypt 2 years into the famine. So, I mean, the oldest probably is five, and the youngest might be about one, thereabouts. And then we're told 17 years later. So, Jacob was there for 17 years. So we get them, they're 18, 21, something like that. And when Israel saw Joseph's sons, he said, "Who are these?" So again, some of that confusion there, because I'm sure that this is not the only time that in 17 years that he has seen these grandkids. Um, this is I wanted to point this out because it seems to be something that is dying of importance, and maybe it's not important, but it was always important to me, and it was important obviously in for the Jews. To this day it's important. They still try to trace back the lineage there. And in Genesis 48:16, we see here the importance of a name. And Jacob says, through them, may my name be kept alive. This is the blessing that he's given. And the names of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, may they grow into a great multitude throughout the land. And I remember as a kid talking to my little brother about the importance of carrying on the family name. And it's really interesting because I'm the only one who is carrying on the family name. Although all my siblings have kids, um, they don't bear the name, and maybe that's not important to people. But it always felt important to me, and when I read it in the Bible, it was important for the Jews, and we can understand why it was important. But there's a sense of pride that comes with a family name. There's a sense of belonging when it comes to a family name. And it was so important. This was what Jacob was wanting to hand down. He wanted to hand down the family name. And it was important going on to what tribe you belong to, the tribal name that you came under. And it was so important. And it was so important when they came back from their from when they were taken away um, as their punishment for what they had done in the land. When they came back, they had to try to prove that they were who they said they were, that they belonged to what they said they belonged, especially the tribe of Levi, in order for them to be able to take part in the work that was traditionally theirs. So then we've seen a bit of the prophetic coming up. We see it arising in different places, and we're seeing it here again, and we're going to see it in a couple places. Um, in chapter 48, verse 19, but his father refused and said, I know my son, I know. This is where he was blessing them, and he had crossed his hands, and Joseph was trying to get him to put his hands proper, to put his hand on the oldest, so the oldest would receive the greater blessing, because as you know, that's the tradition. The older one got everything. That was the idea. The older one got everything, became the head of the family, was responsible for looking after the family. But Jacob is he, no, he's crossed his hands because prophetically he knows what's going to happen, and he says, "I know my son. I know he'll become a people too, and he'll also be great. But his younger brother will be greater than he will, and his descendants will become many nations." So Jacob knows, he's in the know that God does not respect the traditions of humanity. And we see that throughout the different people that God picked. It was always supposed to be the oldest, but God quite often picked somebody other than the oldest. And so he knows this, and he knows this to be true because he's the youngest. Esau was the oldest, Jacob was the youngest. And yet we see that all the blessing has come in through Jacob. That's not saying Esau wasn't blessed. I mean, the nation of Edom comes from him. I mean, he is blessed, but the promise came through Jacob. And so he's quite aware, and he's listening to God, and he's receiving prophetically what's going to happen here. And we see in verse 22, from his birth, Jacob had favored Joseph. There was just something different about Joseph. And even though he had to get after Joseph for his dreams, it was still something that he noted. And he made him the special coat, and his brothers were jealous of him. And Jacob did not make it easy for Joseph because he made his favoritism obvious, but he's still here favoring him. And he says, I'm giving you one portion more than to your brothers, a portion that I took from the Amorites with my sword and with my bow. So he's given that extra to Joseph, really to honor Joseph and to bless Joseph. Um, so then we go into chapter 49, and we see here a big thing of of prophecy that goes down through here, and it's prophecy and blessing. Okay, there's blessing here, but the prophetic is coming through in this blessing. Um, and he says, "Assemble yourselves and listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father." And then he goes down through each of them. I'm only going to highlight the more significant ones here. First of all, Reuben, the oldest, he's demoted here. He's fired as the oldest son. He says, "Reuben, you are my oldest son, my strength and my first contender." That's where he was supposed to be. That's where Reuben was, superior in status and superior in might. This is this was Reuben. He was the oldest. He was the most shining. Uh, think of kind of like Lucifer, right? He stood out from the others, but as wild as the waters, you won't endure. For you went up to your father's bed. You went up and violated my couch. And when we look at the tribes, Reuben isn't one that's going to really stand out. He's not going to stand out at all. Um, yeah, and he doesn't endure. It's and then we have Simeon and Levi. You remember them? You remember that they were the ones who went into the town after because of their sister Dinah, or so they said, and the brothers had tricked the town into circumcising themselves so that they can join in with um, with Jacob. And Simeon and Levi went in and they slaughtered all of the men, and then they took the town as bounty. They took the women, the children, the livestock, any riches that they could find. And Jacob was so upset at them, because they could have brought disaster down upon the family if God had not intervened. And you remember, God had put a fear upon all the nations that they didn't go after the sons. And so here we find this blessing and this prophetic thing here, where Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence, their stock in trade. May I myself never enter their council. May my honor never be linked to their group. For when they were angry, they killed men, and whenever they wished, they maimed oxen. Cursed be their anger, it is violent. Their rage, it is relentless. I'll divide them up within Jacob and disperse them within Israel. Now, we don't hear much about Simeon down the road, but we sure do about Levi, don't we? So there's something from here, because Moses ends up coming from Levi. The priesthood ends up from Levi. The servants of the all things holy were the Levites. But the Levites redeemed themselves, if you'll remember, when Moses came down off the mountain, and everybody had turned it into a great orgy, and he called all those who would be faithful to God to him, and then he told them to strap swords to their sides and go through. And yeah, they inflicted pain and death upon their fellow Israelites, showing their dedication and their passion. And it was because of that, and it may have been loyalty to Moses, or just they had seen the light. But whatever it was, that's the only thing that redeemed them from really disappearing into history. So, and then we come to Judah, and Judah is quite remarkable. What happens with Judah, isn't it? In verse 8, the scepter won't depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from among his banners. Gifts will be brought to him. People will obey him. This is so prophetic, because David came from Judah. David came from Judah, and that Jesus came from the line of David. So Jesus came from Judah. The scepter won't depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from among his banners. Right? Wow. Okay. Now, I just wanted to point this out to you. This is quite remarkable. This, for me, just again speaks so much about Jacob. Um, He loved Rachel, but he honored Leah. Did you notice that? He in his ramblings, who was he thinking about? He was thinking of Rachel, right? He was thinking when he lost Rachel. But here we see the final resting place that he honors Leah. I am soon to join my people. Bury me with my ancestors in the cave that's in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that's in the field of Machpelah, near Mamre, in the land of Canaan, that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite as a burial property. That is where Abraham and his wife Sarah are buried, and where Isaac and his wife Rebekah are buried, and where I buried Leah, not Rachel, where I buried Leah. So it will become known then as the tomb or the burial place of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah. Wow. Okay. The last chapter, Genesis, last chapter here. I just listen. I'm going to be sorry to see Jacob go. I'm sorry to leave him. I just fell in love with this guy, and really really appreciate him. And Jacob had an incredible relationship with God. Um, he was he was just he was he was so rich. He was so incredibly rich, and he took no credit at any time for his success. He always, always, always gave credit to God. He honored God in all things. It stood out for me that he honored Leah. He did what was right by Leah. He was tricked, remember? He was tricked into marrying her, and yet he stood by her. She didn't feel loved because Jacob was infatuated with Rachel, and Rachel wasn't the nicest character. But love is blind, right? But God honored Leah, and the final resting place was given to Leah. He listen. Jacob got to hang out with angels. I'm just like, whoa. They just when you stop and you consider how many encounters he got to wrestle with them. He got to talk with them. He got to see them. He got to see the stairway to heaven. I mean, come on now. He was privy to God's plans. He had access to the prophecy. He was able to prophesy over people and over family. He was blessed, and he was a man of blessing. You remember that he I mean he wouldn't leave people without leaving them with a blessing. And you remember that Isaac had only one blessing. You remember that, right? And that's what Esau was so upset about. Jacob, because of Rebecca, Jacob ended up stealing that blessing. Um, but there was no blessing left for Esau. And Esau said, "Dad, you only have one blessing," and uh, and Jacob had one for each of his sons. Even if the blessing sounded like a curse, he still had something to say over each of his sons, and he blessed them according to what he saw they merited. That's what he did, because that's what blessings were based upon at that time, what they merited. But he had a blessing. He was a man of blessing. And so now, even the Egyptians, listen, we see here that Jacob was honored in his death. We don't see that Joseph was. We don't see he was obviously went through the mummification because his bones were around 400 years later to be carried out. But Jacob is honored here. So there's something about Jacob that impacted Pharaoh, that impacted the officials, that impacted the land. The whole land mourned at his death, and he had basically a state funeral. He was honored in his death. He's quite the guy. So just a couple of things that come out of this as well. We're almost done here. the brothers, I just wanted to point out how the brothers are projecting themselves on Joseph. And you know what I mean. You've seen it before, right? When somebody ends up projecting themselves on somebody else, they're going through something, they're depressed, and suddenly they see all these people who are depressed around them. It's not saying the other people are depressed. It's just that that's how they're feeling. So that's what they're projecting on other people. Um, and we may do it to people all the time, just to justify ourselves in our position on things. And Joseph's brothers were projecting on him. They were feeling guilty. They were feeling ashamed. They didn't understand forgiveness. They had a big problem with this. They couldn't let it go. They were living in constant fear. So they go in verse 15. When Joseph's brothers realized that their father was now dead, they said, "What if Joseph bears a grudge against us and wants to pay us back seriously for all of the terrible things we did to him?" Even though they've seen no indication of that in 17 years, 17 years after the fact, 17 years after the fact, after Joseph forgave them, they're still in fear. So they're projecting on him. And we see here in verse 17, they haven't changed. Come on now. You and I have changed in the last 17 years. I hope we have. I hope we've become better. I hope we love better. I hope we forgive more easily. I hope we have become better, closer to Christ and better human beings because of it. But they continue to be the deceivers. They've made it up. They said, let's tell Joseph that this is what our dad said, so like he won't come after us. And this is what you should say to Joseph. They're saying this is what Jacob said. This is what Jacob said, that they're making it up. Jacob said no such thing. And then they go to Joseph. Please forgive your brothers' sins and misdeeds, for they did terrible things to you. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of your father's God. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Why would Joseph weep? Because after all this time, they still don't know him. Man, the hurt, how it must have hurt. He has looked after them. He's provided for them. They are where they are because of him. If he ever wanted vengeance, he could have done that on day one. He could have thrown them in jail. He could have had them executed. He could have brought them down in the land and turned them into slaves to serve him. He did not. He honored them. He blessed them. He took care of them. And then they come and they lie to him because he knows they're lying to him. They know he knows it. That's why he was crying. In verse 23, just this one other one. I just want to point out it is a real blessing. It's a real honor to live long enough to hold your great grandchildren. Not everybody's going to get that opportunity, especially in this day and age when people just are deciding not to have children anymore. And yeah, thus Joseph lived in Egypt, he and his father's household. Joseph lived 110 years, which is really young, and saw Ephraim's grandchildren, the children of Machir, Manasseh's son, were also born on Joseph's knees. That's his great grandchildren there. Now I'm wondering if he died so young, um, before his brothers died. There's no mention of the other brothers dying at all. So as far as we know, they're still all alive. He's the first to die of them, and he's not the oldest. I wonder if it's because of his treatment during his years as a slave, or is it because there was weak genes? Because remember, Rachel died really young too. Rachel was young when she died. Um, yeah. So just some questions there. Last verse of Genesis. Here we go. 400 years later, Israel will honor Joseph. Joseph's only request. Joseph made Israel's sons promise. It's the only thing he ever asked of them. When God takes care of you, you must bring up my bones. out of here. There's a bit of prophetic there as well. When God takes care of you, what does he mean? When he takes care of them by bringing them out of Egypt and bringing them to the land that he has promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob was the end of the patriarchs. There's only three patriarchs. Joseph is not a patriarch. There was three, and are mentioned all the time: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's to them that the covenant was given. Them the promise was given of the land. So when God takes care of you, when He brings you up, you must bring up my bones out of here. And they did. They honored him. They honored Joseph 400 years later. Can you remember? Can you imagine holding on to a promise that long? But they did. So there you go, people. Congratulate. Have a party tonight. Order some pizza. Celebrate. You have gotten through Genesis, and Job is out of the way, and now we are moving on to some stuff that I have no idea how we're going to try to keep it to 20 minutes or so as we read it, because there's going to be so much in this Exodus. And you guys just be blessed and encouraged today. Feel good. This is good. You've done well. And be blessed. And don't treat this as a bunch of knowledge that you're gaining, but look at the relationship you're coming to understand, right? And just be generous to all the people around you. Be kind, love them, encourage them, because it's not the easiest time we're living through. God bless.